Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for giving up your time. I'm really happy to let you know that Miss Fauzia will obviously be presenting to you our maths calculation policy and the maths that we're doing, and also explain how you can also support your children at home. It obviously comes at prime time while we're online learning, but we had actually intended to do this anyway prior to us going online. So what I will do now is I will hand you over to Miss Fauzia, hopefully if it will go up, and she will explain what we're doing in maths and how you can support your children at home. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Hilton. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. It's lovely to see so many of you joining us today, and thank you. My name is Mrs. Fauzia, and I am the primary maths coordinator, and I'm also currently teaching a class teacher in year 4. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking to you about today, the calculations and lots of the strategies that we're going to be sharing with you today come from what we're doing in the classroom and what we're sharing with each other as teachers. So the main purpose of today's webinar is just to go through and share lots of different strategies and methods that we use with the children in line with the new calculation policy that we have. I'm also going to be talking to you about how you can best support your child at home with the new strategies and the new methods that we're teaching the kids at the moment, and particularly with online learning and it being quite challenging at the minute for some of the children. I'll be going through lots of different ways that you can support your children at home. If you do have any questions, please, whilst I'm going through my presentation, please do make a note of them, and you will have a chance at the end to share those questions with us, and we'll take your questions. Okay, so just before I start beginning to share lots of strategies that we do look at in school, I did want to just run you through what we currently do in the classroom and what our day-to-day teaching looks like. So at the moment we follow White Rose, which works in line with the British national curriculum. And what White Rose does is it encourages the mastery style approach towards maths. And I'm going to just briefly touch on what the 5 big ideas of mastery are and what a mastery actually means, because this is a lot of what we embed in our day-to-day lessons and in our and particularly now that we're online, we're really encouraging children to use this mastery style approach. So the first one being the representation and structure. That's what it's kind of named, and what we do here is we encourage children to use concrete resources to help show what maths looks like, and this happens mainly in reception, early years, all the way up to key stage 1, and even in key stage 2 lots of children use concrete resources to show what the maths looks like. We then encourage children to move on to the pictorial representations, so lots of children using pictures and lots of different images to help show what the maths calculation looks like. And then eventually, as they move further up this primary school, up into year 5 and year 6, we'll be hoping that a lot of the children are moved on to the abstract representation, which is the normal use of a formal written method such as the column method or the bus stop method for division. And a lot of those, as you can see in the right hand corner here, you can see that some of what I've just talked about, for example, the concrete resources, you can see that there's a picture there of a child who's created an array using some sort of physical resource or physical object. You can see there's pictures of the same kind of thing, making groups, so they've got like smiley faces there, so they're really working on using those 3 different types of representations, and we try and encourage that in the primary school. The second area of mastery is fluency, and I think we've made huge progress with this so far, particularly with the introduction of times tables, Rockstar and Numbots that Key Stage 1 are using. It's just really encouraging the children to have quick and instant recall of number bonds to 10 in Key Stage 1, number bonds to 100 as they move up into year 3, and then really pushing on the times table, so multiplication and division facts, and being able to instantly recall them. And I will be talking a little bit about times tables Rockstar later on in my presentation, just to kind of help to embed those multiplication and division facts. Moving on to the third big idea then from the mastery approach is variation. Now, variation is very similar to the image you can see there on the top right hand corner again, and it's been exposed to a mathematical concept and then showing it in different ways. And you can see there that the children have been given a simple multiplication, which is 3 times 5, and then they need to show how many different ways can the children show that calculation. And you can see they've used concrete objects there using an array. You can see they've tried to make groups of 5 there. You can see that they've used repeated addition to show the same type of calculation, eventually leading to the same answer, and then the commutative property, which I'm also going to talk about later on in the slide as well. So it's just encouraging children to try and show maths in various different ways and apply themselves in different ways as well. And then the fourth big idea for the mastery approach is mathematical thinking, and this is something that teachers really do in their day-to-day teaching. It's encouraging children to think deeper than just the calculation. So we do a lot of this in the classroom when we're questioning the children. We're really trying to focus on asking the children to explain how they know an answer or how they got to an answer. Asking children to spot mistakes in a calculation. So it's just all those types of questions that we really try and encourage children to think about so that they can deepen their understanding about a mathematical concept that they've learnt. And then finally, the last big idea, the fifth one there for the mastery approach, is coherence. And this is all about encouraging children to make small connected steps, so to make links between their learning in maths. So for example, if they've looked at multiplication and division earlier on in the year in term 1, and then we move on to fractions in term 2, they're able to make the links between multiplication and division and the fraction work that they then move on to, and it helps to support them to make those small steps towards the topics that get a little bit trickier as they move further on into the year. And then the national curriculum, which I just mentioned earlier, also encourages the same style of things that we just mentioned with the mastery approach. It's encouraging children to be fluent, so being fluent and able to recall their number facts and times tables facts. It encourages children to reason, so thinking about how they can problem solve and apply themselves in various different ways. And the same thing with White Rose we have set out for the national curriculum also. So they're split into domains, and you can see the domains have particular topics, and this is pretty much the order that we cover them in throughout the academic year. So obviously Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 both start with number and place value, because the children need to have a really secure understanding of number and place value before they move on to more complicated strategies or more complicated domains within these areas. They then move on to addition and subtraction, so they're really using what they've learned from their number and place value work to help add and subtract, both mentally and written methods as well, which I'll be showing you in a moment. The children then move on to multiplication and division. Again, this is where the times tables really come in and really important with helping children to understand how to multiply larger numbers and divide larger numbers. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the fractions comes after the multiplication and division, because it helps to support the children with their fractions work. And then in year 4, the children are also introduced to decimals. And then when the children get into year 6, that's when they start looking at decimals and percentages together. The next domain is measure, and in this block or this area, the children really focus on converting different units of measurement. They look at reading time, they look at money, they look at various different forms of measurement within that topic. And again, all the work that they would have done before with multiplying and dividing and some of the fraction work all helps to support them with that topic, and hopefully they then make the links between their learning. And the geometry, which is split into 2 separate parts. We teach geometry, which is properties of shape first. So we look at recognizing shapes, especially in Key Stage 1 and reception. So what the name of the shapes are, and then the children move on to learning the properties of the shapes. So what makes those shapes special? And they look at 2D shapes, they look at 3D shapes. And then moving on to the second area of geometry, which is position and direction. That's where children learn, it starts to get a little bit more complicated there, and they're learning to move shapes on a grid, they're learning to translate, they're learning to reflect shapes on a grid, they're learning to read coordinates on a grid, and they're learning to write coordinates as well. So it's really, you can see the clear progression between the domains as the children move through the year. And then lastly, we look at statistics. And it's introduced in year 2 for Key Stage 1, and it really helps the children to understand or be able to read data. And part of that data, it starts off with pictograms and being able to understand what pictograms are, and then moving on to bar charts, line graphs, any types of graphs. We help the children to really think about the data that they're presented with and really help them to understand what they need to do to understand it. And then in year 6, when the children get into year 6, they do start algebra. It's very basic algebra, but it really sets the foundation for them, particularly as they move up to year 7, where they start to learn a little bit more complicated domains as they move into key stage 3. So I just want to share with you a few ways, because I've talked a lot about fluency, ways that you can support your child with their times tables and their number bonds, because I know a lot of children, every time we talk about times tables, they're very much like, oh, do I have to? And then they're very reluctant. So what we've done is we've introduced this year Times Tables Rockstar for Key Stage 2 children. And this is a really good app. I can tell you from personal experience from the children that I teach in my class and across the school, the feedback I've had from the children, that actually they really enjoy playing Times Tables Rockstar, and it's a really fun way for them to learn their times tables. So they get to compete with teachers, they get to compete with their peers in their class, they get to compete with other children in their class, and other children across the school, and it's a really great way to help encourage children to learn their times tables, and it helps with encouraging them to be a bit more fluent, a bit more quicker with their times tables. All children from years 3 to 6 should now have access to Times Tables Rockstar, and they're free to log in as and when they want to. Most of the time, I know lots of teachers have told me that they've been setting up competitions between the classes in the year groups. I know there's some competitions that are going to happen between different year groups, and it really helps. And I know the children get very competitive when it comes to winning, so it really helps to encourage children to become really much more fluent, and they're learning their times tables without actually realizing it because they're having so much fun with it. Similarly, for Key Stage 1, we do have Numbots. It's a little bit different with Numbots because it's very much child-led. Numbots is, and that's available for Key Stage 1 children and reception children, where children are given the opportunity to practice recalling their number facts, and mainly focuses on number bonds to 10, and then it moves on to more complicated number bonds up to 100 as the children progress through it. And again, it's another great way for children to practice their number bonds in a really fun way, because once they earn a certain number of points, they're able to buy different gadgets for their robot. So it's again for a very child-friendly app, and I think it really helps children to learn their number bonds without actually realizing they're learning them, and having lots of fun with it as well. And then finally, another one that I recently we're going to share with you as well, a new one, is called 1 Minute Maths for Key Stage 1, and again it's from White Rose, and it's an app that can be downloaded from the App Store or Google Play, and again it's another great app for Key Stage 1 children when they're practicing their number bonds to 10. You've got addition, subtraction and subsidizing in that app, so it's a really useful way to encourage the children to practice their number bonds and to become a lot more fluent with them. And I just want to let you know that it's not just at home. Obviously, we expect the children to be doing this. At school, we do have a focus of times tables every week, whether it's just the class focus or if it's the whole year group focus. We do have a focus of a specific times table, particularly in Key Stage 2, and we try and ensure that we're having short intervals of that times table being taught or chanted in some way throughout the course of the week, so that the children are really learning it and it's really being embedded, so that they can become instant in recalling those facts. So it's just another few things that we are doing at school as well to support children with their fluency. Also an app that I haven't mentioned just yet, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's called Hit the Button. It's another great app, not just for times tables. It does of course have times tables on there, but it's great for doubling and halving numbers. It's great for number bonds to 10. There's many things on there, many games that children can play. Again, it encourages speed and accuracy with all those, with number bonds and with times tables. So I'd really recommend that as another app that you can use to help support your child at home with number bonds and times tables. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly introduce the calculation policy. I'm not going to go through every single aspect of the calculation policy because there's quite a lot there, but I do just want to let you know that it is available to download on the school website under news, resources, and then download. So if you do want to have another look at it after this or in your own time, please feel free to download that. Just for you then, that Parkhouse calculation policy is fairly new this year. It is split into the 4 operations, so addition, subtraction, multiplication, and addition. That's the one I missed. And it's split into mental and written calculations, okay, and I'll show you a few in a moment. It's also split into phases, so years 1 and 2 is merged together, years 3 and 4 is merged together, and year 5 and 6 is merged together. And the reason for that is so that you can see the clear progression between each year group, so that if maybe you want to go back to a specific method or a specific strategy, you can go back and see it from the previous year group, or if you want to look ahead the same way. So I'm going to go through each one of those policies very briefly, just to show you what some of those methods look like and what they're called, so you're familiar with them. Lots of the children will be using some of these methods that I've got there on the screen and that I'll be talking about in a minute, so it'll be really useful for you to be familiar with them as well. So when they start using words like part whole, you'll know what part whole means, hopefully. So the first thing is with years 1 and 2, the mental addition and subtraction is, again, it's a real big push for children to learn the number facts to 10 and be very fluent and very quick in them. I've shared some ways that you can do that at home with the children. It's encouraging children to be able to count on in 10. And then moving on to the written addition and subtraction, it's being able to use number lines to count on. So really starting to think about written ways that children can show this, and partitioning numbers using part whole. And as you can see there in the top right hand corner, you can see the part whole method there, and this method is designed to show to show numbers partitioned and how many ways that you can make a particular number. There's a larger piece, or a part rather, which is the whole, and it's got the largest number in there, and then it's split into 2 parts which have the 2 smaller number, and the idea is that the 2 smaller parts add up to make the whole. And it's very, I'll show you another method in a minute as well. So we're really in years 1 and 2, and in reception also, we're really encouraging these methods. We're introducing these methods, and the children are hopefully getting a bit more familiar with them as well. We're using objects. So as I mentioned earlier, with using concrete objects, we're really encouraging that in reception in year 1, children holding objects and showing numbers using objects that they can actually hold. And then eventually, once the children are a bit more confident with showing those numbers with concrete objects and using this part whole method, we start thinking about, this is maybe up towards year 2, the expanded written method. And just there, you should be able to see the expanded written method, which shows the numbers partitioned in 10s and 1s, and then children using that method to help add and subtract numbers. And then I'm moving on to multiplication and division. Again, as I mentioned earlier, doubling and halving, we're really pushing on that, particularly in years 1 and 2. So focusing on very simple doubles and halves. Children are learning to group, as I showed you earlier as well. And then moving up into year 2, they're learning to count in multiples of 2s, 5s and 10s. And yes, they're learning those times tables, but we're also encouraging them to use, again, concrete objects to show what that looks like, what counting up in 2s looks like, what counting up in 5s looks like, using pictures to show what that looks like also. And then written methods in year 1. So obviously they're still very small in year 1 and 2 and in reception. So at that point, we're just encouraging them to use jotting. So any markings that they want to make of some of the numbers or the calculations that they're doing, partitioning numbers, and then using arrays. So just here in the bottom right hand corner, it just shows you an example of what an array looks like. So it's just another pictorial representation of an array, and it shows the multiplication 3 times 7. And it just has circle images, usually circles. It's usually made up of circles, but you can have any other picture in there. And you can see going vertically, there's 3, and then going across, there's 7. And it just helps to show the children what that looks like. So we really encourage children to use those as well. And then as they get up into year 2, and they're learning their times tables a little bit more, we start to encourage children to look at missing number problems. And you can see here in the bottom left-hand corner, just presenting the children with a missing number in a calculation, and them using their knowledge of multiplication and division to work out what the missing number will be. And then it gets a little bit more complicated as they move up into years 3 and 4. Again, mental addition and subtraction, they then move on to learning their number bonds to 100. So they would have learned their number bonds to 10 by this point. They're counting on in hundreds and thousands now. And then it moves on to a little bit more complicated in year 4, where they start adding decimals to the next or the nearest whole number. And then more written methods. So you start to see more written methods up in year 3 and 4. So we start with the expanded column method, which I did mention earlier, which was partitioning the number. We start looking at that in year 3, and then we start moving on to the compact column method, which is the method there in the center you can see on the screen. It's, you know, organizing the numbers in a column, and then the children working systematically from the right towards the left to work out what the addition is for that. And then we encourage them, they'll be start to adding decimals using the same method, the compact column method, to add decimals, but that's definitely something they're doing in year 4. But you're doing the same kind of thing, but they've got a decimal there to think about. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with the part whole method, and then the bar model, which is something else that we're really encouraging children to use, another pictorial representation of a calculation. And you can see just here in the top right hand corner, there's the part whole for that calculation, and then next to it, that's the bar model. And the bar model is exactly the same idea as the part whole. It's just that the image is represented in bars as opposed to circular parts. And the 2 parts are at the bottom there. You can see the 2 smaller bars are the parts, and then there's a larger bar at the top, which is the whole. So that's what the bar model is. So if ever you hear your child mention the term bar model, mom, dad, I'm using bar modeling in maths, this is what they mean. Because I know that's a lot of, that's fairly new to children as well at Park House. Moving on to multiplication and division then, again, we're still encouraging children to learning to double and halve, multiplying by 2 and dividing by 2. And then we move on to the idea of commutativity. So I think I mentioned this earlier. A lot of the children understand what this means, and it's multiplying. When you multiply 2 numbers, for example, 4 times 8, those numbers can be switched around and they mean exactly the same thing. They represent exactly the same thing. And then obviously by the end of year 4, the children should know all their times tables up to 12, including their division facts. So we're really trying to encourage and embed those times tables so that by the end of year 4, they're fluent. So they're ready to go up into year 5 and 6 to use those times tables to support them in other areas of maths. And then written methods for multiplication and division. So we do encourage the children to start off with the grid method, particularly in year 3. As you can see an example there of the grid method where they partition the number and then they multiply each number by 6 to give them the answer, and then they add them up in the end. And then by the time they get into year 4, we're really encouraging them to use the vertical algorithm, and you can see it's just the column method there at the bottom for multiplying. So we really encourage them to use that by the end of year 4, and they only by the end of year 4 really multiplying 3 digits, maybe 4 digits by 1 digit. We encourage them to think about sharing in year 3 as a form of division, and then by the end of year 4, the children should know how to use short division with and without remainders. And then as we get up into year 5 and 6, it gets a little bit more complicated, which is why the times tables are really, really important at this point. When they get to addition and subtraction, they're learning to add decimals now by this point. They need to know their number bonds to 1, meaning that they need to know the decimals. They need to be able to add decimals to the nearest 1 or the nearest whole number. And then more written methods, again, they will be using column method quite confidently by the time they get into year 5 and 6 for adding decimals, and then they will move on to much larger numbers, so 100,000s and millions by that point in year 5 and 6. So they should be able to use the column method to add much larger numbers. And again, we'll be encouraging them to use bar modeling to represent what a calculation for addition and subtraction looks like. And then mental multiplication and division, encouraging them to multiply, and by this point they should be able to divide by 10, 100 and 1000. And then doubling and halving they should be pretty confident with doubling and halving whole numbers by this point. So they'll be learning to double and halve decimals. And then written methods for multiplication and division. So for short multiplication, by this point, because in year 4 they would have already been introduced to the vertical algorithm, so the column method. By this point, when they get into year 5, they'll be learning to multiply 2-digit numbers by 2-digit numbers, again using the vertical algorithm method or the column method. And then they will be learning to multiply decimals by the time they get into year 6, again using the same kind of method that we just discussed. And then for division, by year 5, they should know how to use short division because they would have done it in year 4. So they should be using short division confidently, but then they will be moving on to using long division in years 5 and 6. So they will be dividing much larger numbers, not just by a 1-digit number, but also by 2- and 3-digit numbers. So how can you best support your child with all these things that I've just talked about? So as I mentioned earlier, lots of the apps that are there, I've just shared again with you on the screen. So I've just talked about Numbots, I've talked about Hit the Button, I've talked about Times Tables Rockstar, and that new White Rose 1-minute maths for Key Stage 1 and maybe reception as well. There's also, we still have access, and the children still have access to Mathletics. So if there is anything that you know your child has already covered in school, and you know that you want to really embed it so that they don't forget. For example, if a child has learned how to find equivalent fractions, for example, and the class have now moved on to something else, the next topic, you don't want your child to forget that. You can easily go onto Mathletics and you can, your child can choose the activity that they want to complete, and it's like a quick revision of topics that they've already covered. If you're not sure about what topics that your child has covered, you can find the curriculum maps on our school website under the primary years curriculum, and on there you will see all the objectives that your child will complete for that term for maths and many other subjects as well. So you'll know what your child has covered in that term or the previous term. So you can always go back, use Mathletics, use lots of other apps that I've just mentioned to help, really embed that so your child doesn't forget. I would highly recommend reading the rest of that calculation policy, because there's lots of things in there that we do at school, and it will be really useful for you to be aware of how we do it and the strategies we use and the methods that we use. And as I mentioned earlier, there's nothing, I can't stress how important it is to encourage children to learn their times tables up in Key Stage 2 and then number bonds in Key Stage 1 and reception, because that's really the core to helping support them when they move on to much more complicated areas and topics in maths. So I'd really encourage you to use those apps that I've just mentioned. The children also have a 100 square in their diaries, and they also have a multiplication grid in their diaries. So in their school diaries, they should have a copy of those things. And if you find that, the children are online at the moment and they've found it really difficult to multiply numbers together, please use those resources that are in the children's diaries, because they can really support at home whilst they're online. I encourage children, even at school, when they're in the classroom, to have their diaries open and to be using those as and when they feel necessary. So it could really help to build their confidence with their number bonds and their times tables as well. Also, I wanted to just mention that, as I mentioned earlier, about concrete resources and having those, those objects and being able to hold them, particularly for children in reception and in Key Stage 1. A lot of them, it's very difficult for them to learn new concepts online, and it's challenging. So here's a really good way that we in school, as well as teachers, as practitioners, we use these things in the classroom to help, really get children excited about maths and really understand what the maths is. So using, really basic things like bottle caps and putting the place value of digits or numbers on those bottle caps, and asking your child to make the number 342 or the number 21 using those bottle caps. It really helped to embed. It'll make it fun for your child, but it'll really help to embed that understanding of place value. And you're also recycling bottle caps, which will help save the environment. And you can also, again, use those for place value up. So if it's not always something that can be used in Key Stage 1, you can use it again for further up in the school when the children get into 3 and 4. It's a thing that it's a resource that can be used for all age group children. Another really useful resource that we've used at school also is using macaroni cheese, and just using anything. It doesn't have to be macaroni cheese. It could be any object, could be Lego, anything your child really is really passionate about and enjoys playing with, cars, bricks, little toys, little dinosaurs, whatever it is, using anything you can at home to really encourage your child to to help them. You know, you could just ask them, can you get 3 dinosaurs, and can you get 5 dinosaurs, and can you add them together? And, you know, just having those objects there will help to really encourage your child to think, to have fun, but to also help to embed that maths as well, to help embed those number bonds, for example, and further up in the school, the times tables or any other maths concept that they might be struggling with, particularly as we are online as well. And then just there in the right hand corner, I've just listed all the things that I just want to remind you about. So, you know, using the multiplication squares and number squares that are in their diaries. Again, really encouraging children to get onto Times Tables Rockstar. I know we're going to have some competitions coming up in Key Stage 2 for those. And Numbots, using that to your advantage at home, particularly as they are online now as well, to help embed those number bonds to 10. The new app that I mentioned, which is the White Rose 1 Minute Maths for Key Stage 1 children, is really handy as well. And then obviously the Mathletics, which I mentioned earlier, as a revision tool to, you know, look at topics that the children have covered. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with Hit the Button as well, a great app for both Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 children. And also just using as many different concrete resources as I just shown you there, to help, you know, really create that excitement in your child about maths. Anything that they're passionate about or anything that they enjoy playing with really help support them. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. Hopefully you've made a note of any questions. Mrs. Horton and I will be taking any questions that you might have. If you do think of anything after today's presentation, I have put my email there for you, so you can just drop me an email to ask away your questions. But if you do have any questions, please do. I think we're typing them into the chat box. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So we're just, if you just type in your questions into the chat box and we'll answer them.
Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fauziya there. I think you've given them lots of information, lots of first of thought, lots of you know, new concepts. I know loads of parents look at maths and they're like, oh my goodness, this is not the way I learned when I was in school. So I think, you know, by giving you a summary there of what we are doing in school, but access to that calculation policy on our school website for you to go in and have a share and a look at that. It should be able to help you to kind of gain that knowledge as well. Can you please share? So I'll just publish this question. So the question that has been asked says, can you please share a pin for the apps? Oh, that's been sent twice. Miss Fauziya, is there any way we could do that? Should I put it in the weekly notices? Actually, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it?
Is that for the new White Rose 1 Minute app? Yeah,
because yeah, okay. What we'll do is this week in the weekly notices, I will send a link to the apps that that weekly notice will go out tomorrow. So I will send a link to the apps that Miss Fauziya has recommended. In reception, do the children have to solve number sentences? So in reception, the children are starting to solve number sentences if they are ready. So they are given calculations. So but it depends on when your child is ready. So we have continuous provision going on, obviously, in reception. So it's based on their individual needs, challenges, etc. So everything that we cover in maths is given to all of the children, and as they become ready, the teacher will then differentiate and start asking them number sentences once they've moved from the concepts of the number bonds, etc. So there isn't actually an objective in reception for it, but it doesn't mean that we hold the children back. If they're ready, the children will be moved on, yes. Mathletics, do you have access to it? Yes, they should have access to, they have logins, don't they, Miss Fauziya?
Yeah, we've got access to Mathletics until May, so they should have logins and it should still work until the end of May, hopefully.
Yeah, so they should be have those logins. If your child doesn't have the login, you just need to message the class teacher and the class teacher will be able to reorganize their login to be sent to them. I will make sure that for all of the apps that we have just mentioned there, I will provide a link for all of them for you to be able to find them. So don't worry, I'll put that in the weekly notices this week for every single one of the apps that Miss Fauziya has mentioned. I think that's all of the main questions that have just come in. I'll give everyone a few more minutes to ask any more questions. Otherwise, like Ms. Fauzia has said, if anything comes up post this meeting, post looking at the calculation policy, and if there's anything challenging, she's more than happy to ask any questions as well. I mean, things like, if we were back in school, we could hold like parent workshops and things as well, which would be really nice. So yeah, that would be lovely. So the teachers wouldn't necessarily send revision on previous topics. Someone's just asked this question. But what you can do is you can look at the medium-term plans, which show the topics that the children have learned, and there you can look at what topics they've already covered. If I'm not going to publish anything if it's about your personal needs for children, but if you email your class teachers if you have any concerns specific to your child, so if you feel like they need to be a bit more challenged, or you feel like they need a bit more support, then please just email your class teacher, and the class teacher will then be able to do that for you. We've got lots of parents thanking you, Ms. Fauzia. It's clarified things for them. I think definitely, like things like written method, which was what most of us learned when we were in school, then looking at number lines and arrays, and it throws you, just the language, let alone the actual concepts and how to support children with it. And I know that many of the parents give up and just say, do you know what, I don't understand it myself and I can't help you with this. So the calculation policy does outline everything really, really clearly. So please download that and have a little look at that if your child is saying, I need to do it like this. Okay, no more questions seem to be coming in. So what I would say is thank you all for your time. Thank you, Ms. Fauzia, for your presentation this evening. It's been absolutely amazing. I think it's brought real clarification to everybody. Parents, like I've just said, parents, carers, sorry, like I've just said, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to email them through to Ms. Fauzia. If you have something specific to your child, like you feel like they need to be challenged or they need some more support, please email your class teachers directly, because Ms. Fauzia won't be able to respond to questions like that. She can respond to questions overall in terms of maths. What I will do, like I just said, is in tomorrow's weekly notices, Ms. Fauzia will send me through all of the links for the apps, and I will make sure they're all posted there. Thank you very much, Nick and Claire. That's absolutely lovely message there. And this presentation, what will happen with this is it is posted on the school website. So when you go to the school website, someone's just asked for us to share it. When you go to the school website, if you go down to the bottom, it says ParkHouseConnects, and I literally send the recording over. So this whole recording will be there with all of the presentation attached, etc., etc. So please feel free to go back and rewatch if you need to. Okay, thank you everyone. I will end it there. Have a lovely rest of your evening, enjoying dinner or whatever else it is that you're going to do this evening. And again, thank you so much, Ms. Fauzia, for giving up your time this evening. Bye, everybody.